Good evening, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Brian Sauer with the Zionsville Police Department. I'll be your host for our community conversation tonight. Just a little bit about myself. I've been with the Zionsville Police Department for 17 years. I am currently a lieutenant in the patrol division, and I run the night shift out on the roads in the town of Zionsville. A couple of the extra things that I do, privileged to be an emergency vehicle operations instructor. So I get to participate and help certify all of our officers in their annually required vehicle operations. I'm also our department coordinator for our grants through the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute. The Criminal Justice Institute gives us overtime money to work special enforcements for seat belts, operating a vehicle while intoxicated or drunk driving. And one of our most popular grants is the school bus stop arm violation, where we follow around school buses and try to make sure that no one runs those stop arms and keep those kids as safe as possible. One of the benefits of the grant work, not only is it the overtime, so it doesn't actually cost the town our salary money to go work on those special high visibility enforcements, but they also donate equipment. So in the past, our department has received an in-vehicle radar system. We recently just received a laser for measuring speeds of vehicles. We've also had over a dozen portable breath tests for alcohol donated to our department. Some of the other things I've been able to be involved in are some of our community outreach efforts. I've done a lot with Special Olympics of Indiana. I've done the Strikes for Special Olympics bowling event, the Polar Plunge, where you get to jump into the freezing water in Eagle Creek Reservoir, Cops on a Rooftop, where you're up on top of a rooftop of usually a donut shop for the day, all to raise funds. And the current fundraiser we have going benefits the Boone County Cancer Society. It is No Shave November, so some of us are attempting to grow beards. You can't see mine under my mask, but we are required to donate towards the No Shave November fundraiser, and you're supposed to donate about what you think you would spend on your normal grooming. And the whole idea behind that is that for people that have or have gone through cancer, a lot of times they don't get to keep their hair. So we kind of get to grow extra hair as a symbol for that. And this is our second year to do No Shave November, but this year we've put it out to the community as a matching fundraiser or a kind of a friendly competition. So if you wanted to donate to that, you can go to the Boone County Cancer Society's website, and that website is boonecountycancersociety.org/donate. And there should be a field in there where you can type either a memo or I forget what the actual line is called, but in that line, if you put hashtag #NoShaveZPD, like the Zionsville Police Department, that money will be tagged as part of the community contributions of that friendly competition. And at the end of the month, we will get to see who raised more money between the police department and my understanding is it's the town and also the community. So without further ado, tonight's conversation through the community conversation series is on systematic racism. I ask that everyone be open-minded during this conversation and be thoughtful on the topic that can be very emotional. It is through hard conversations like this that we can help close the gap between law enforcement and the communities that we serve. I will be around throughout and after the conversation, so if anyone has any questions, I'll be here to help field those. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Abbie Robinson-Armstrong. She's a PhD and she is a Zionsville resident. She's the former vice president for intercultural affairs and a professor at Loyola Marymount University, which is in California. During her time there, she designed and implemented an internationally renowned evidence-based program on identifying and mitigating implicit bias. She's graciously volunteered her time to lead these conversations for our community. Without further ado, Dr. Robinson-Armstrong.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you mentioned the idea that talking about systemic racism or racism in itself is very difficult for some people. So I'm hoping that we all understand that. Tonight, I want to make sure that you know that all of the data and all of the information that I'm presenting to you actually comes from white people, white researchers and white sociologists and psychologists. And I did that primarily because it is very important to hear from people who are interested in this kind of topic, but individuals who have studied this topic and who have come up with theories and ideas that can help us all to reshape our lives and create better communities. So I'm going to start with the presentation overview. Tonight, hopefully, I think it's, yeah, okay. Tonight, we're going to more or less define the term systemic racism, and we're going to look at some related terms as well. We're also going to look at some data, and that's really the only way I can tell this story, because you can't just go around talking about a topic like this without actually having scientific evidence to support any conclusions that anyone would come up with in reference to systemic racism. So we're going to look at data that illustrates that systemic racism does exist in the United States. It exists in churches and religious organizations. It exists in the criminal justice system. It exists in education, business and industry, healthcare, and housing. Last week, or Monday rather, I sent you some articles. And some of those articles I picked purposely because I wanted you to see that there are major organizations in this country that are not denying the fact that systemic racism exists. In fact, they are basically creating new policies and revising their policies, and we'll get to that. It's a whole list of them, organizations across the country that are doing just that to sort of try to eradicate systemic racism from their organizations. One of the articles I sent you was one by the title was American College of Physicians Propose Policies and Actions to Confront Systemic Racism, Discrimination, and Injustices in Healthcare and Law Enforcement. I thought that was a very, very interesting article, and the very fact that it's put out by the American College of Physicians representing all doctors in this country. The other one that I sent you that I thought was extremely interesting, and in fact it was very interesting to me because I had never thought about the way in which insurance companies could discriminate. But the title of the article was Insurance Regulators Pledge to Address Racism and Discrimination Within the Industry. And in that article, they talk a lot about what they did that all these years since there was an industry, what they did that was wrong and what they're going to correct. And the other one, how systemic racism exists in U.S. housing policies. I really don't think that's new. That's a new idea. But however, most people know that from, if you live 5 or 10 years, you know that. And then I gave you also some 14 examples of systemic racism in the criminal justice system. And finally, the one I want to bring to your attention before we move on is diagnosing and treating systemic racism. This is an article that was put out by the New England Journal of Medicine. As you know, the New England Journal of Medicine is the most prestigious medical journal in the United States. And they put this article out 2 years ago on what they're going to do to address systemic racism across the country in healthcare. So the other thing I want to talk about, we're going to get to some myths that keep racism in place. And again, these myths were designed by one of the most famous white female professors in this country who deals with this topic. And then 4 tests for people struggling with issues of race. Again, that's a very famous, very well-known white female professor who deals in issues of race. So what are our learning objectives tonight? Hopefully, we're going to be able to, when you're done tonight, we're going to be able to identify systemic racism. We're going to be able to understand the terms that are related to systemic racism and understand how systemic racism impacts people of color. We're going to be able to describe those myths that keep racism in place and identify new policies that are designed to dismantle systemic racism in organizations. That's that list of organizations that I told you we're going to talk about tonight. And by the time we're done, hopefully you can walk away with a plan to develop and identify systemic racism in your own environment and manage it in some way. So what's the difference between systematic and systemic? We need to understand that before we can actually understand the definition of systemic racism. So systematic is an adjective that primarily means that showing or involving a system, method, or a plan, and a synonym for the word systematic is methodical. Systemic, on the other hand, is an adjective that means of or relating to a system. It's used to describe a phenomenon, such as an illness, or a social problem, such as systemic racism, that affects every part of an entire system. So that's the distinct difference. Where did this term come from? Joe Fagan is, as I said, he's an extremely well-known professor. He's the Ella McFadden Distinguished Professor of Sociology at Texas University, and Texas A&M, I'm sorry. And he is the researcher, the sociological researcher that developed the term systemic racism after studying the topic for many, many years. He's the one that almost everybody in higher education looks to for guidance when we're talking about racism. Joe Fagan also made it clear that his definition of systemic racism accounts for individual, institutional, and structural forms of racism. We know that those forms differ from each other. Now here's the definition. That's Dr. Fagan's actual definition. What is systemic racism? That was the question that when community members were surveyed, that was one of the questions that they came back with. So I wanted to make sure that we got the right definition of this term. So systemic racism includes the complex array of anti-Black practices, the unjustly gained political economic power of whites, the continued economic and other resource inequities along racial lines, and the white racist ideologies and attitudes created to maintain and rationalize white privilege and power. That is Joe Fagan's definition, and that is the definition that's used across the country when one is talking about systemic racism. Now, last week, some people thought it was a very good idea to stop at certain points and open the chat room up so that people could ask questions. And I'm going to do that in a few minutes so that we can ask questions before we actually move on to the next sections. So let's move on. Let's go on for a bit here. According to Professor Fegan, though, there is a lot of resistance to racism. And resistance to racism is an important part of systemic racism. These are his quotes. I'm not beginning them with, quote and an end of quote, because you can see up there that that's a quote. So everything that I'm saying here comes from Professor Fegan. And again, according to Professor Fegan, racism has never been passively accepted by those who suffer it. So systematic racism is always accompanied by acts of resistance that may manifest as protests, political campaigns, lawsuits, resisting white authority figures, and speaking out against racist stereotypes, beliefs, and language. And I think that's one of the areas where a lot of people don't understand that when one has been confronted with systematic racism or even individual racism, I guess people don't understand that people are going to react to it, that it's just a natural thing that people react to something that has really cut their emotional selves in half, because that's really what racism does. It cuts your emotional self in half. And I think Joe Fegan said it very well, that you can expect protests. We're not talking about protests that's not lawful under any circumstance. We're talking about peaceful protests. You can expect that when a person's been shot by the police, or you can expect that when something else has happened that's defined as systemic racism. According to Professor Fegan also, he's saying that the white backlash that comes when there is some kind of protest or some kind of reaction after systemic racist situation has occurred, he's saying that the white backlash that typically follows that resistance, like countering Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter, does the work of limiting the effect of resistance and maintaining a racist system. I think I chose that quote because I thought it made an awful lot of sense to me. Reuters, as you know, is one of the most well-respected media outlets in the world, actually. They put out a brand new article called The Race Gap, How U.S. Systematic Racism Plays Out in Black Lives. And I just took a quote from their article because it was an outstanding article and it had a lot of data in it that we can't cover tonight. But I thought that this quote, from birth to death, Black people face systemic disadvantages in American life more than 150 years after slavery was abolished. I thought that was a great quote that Reuters put out that's connected to their article, The Race Gap. Now, as I said before, the only way we can determine whether or not systemic racism exists in the United States or anywhere else is to look at the data. Data tells the story. That's the only way you can call something systemic racism. If you don't have scientific evidence, then you can't call it, you really can't call it anything. This data that I am presenting to you tonight comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and all other government agencies in this country. And the data was called by an organization called Business Insider. So this is not data that I created. This is data that I got from Business Insider, and that they got it from various government organizations. The first slide we're looking at is employment population ratio by race and ethnicity. And as you can see, the major point here is that the employment ratio has been lower for Black people for many years. I mean, they only looked at from 2007 to 2019. But if you go back 50, 60 years from now, you would see the same situation. As you can see, the employment ratio for Black people, 49.6%, Hispanics, 52.8%, and whites, 53.4%. Let's look at the unemployment rate. And again, Business Insider took this data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So you can see that the unemployment rate over the years from 2007 through 2019 was 16.8% for whites and 12.4% for Blacks. Look at professional and managerial unemployment. These are the jobs that are at the top of any organization. And again, these statistics come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as you can see, in the professional and managerial employment area, whites and Asians are represented more so than Blacks and Hispanics and Latinos. And the other thing that is not here, but I learned as I was doing the research for this session tonight, there was several studies done on what's called whitened resumes. What they found out during these studies is that when Latinos and Blacks whitened their resume, the percentage of individuals that were hired in the professional and managerial employment areas went up slightly. What that means when we say whiten the resume, that means make sure that your name doesn't sound like what one would call a so-called African American name. Make sure that you take off of your resume anything that would identify you as a Black or Hispanic person. For example, if I graduated from a historically Black institution, that would definitely put me in the category of being an African American. Or if I lived in a certain zip code in this state or in this country, again, that would put me, that would make sure that people would, definitely know who I am. And from a racist point of view, because of my zip code, because of the university I graduated from, and even because of the high school that I graduated from. If I said that I graduated from Crispus Attucks High School here in Indianapolis, at my age, people would immediately say, oh, well, that's an African-American woman, which is not, I didn't graduate from there because I grew up in Florida, but they would immediately say that that's an African-American woman because Crispus Attucks High School was a high school for Black people. Let's go on to the CEOs by race and ethnicity. This is really not a surprise to any of us. You can just see on the television when they're interviewing CEOs of this company and that company and whatever, you can see that this statistic is accurate. And you can also see what this statistics tells you is that there's severe underrepresentation at the top of corporate America in terms of race and ethnicity, severe representation. And notice at the bottom that this data, they began collecting this data in 2004 and they ended in 2019. So, there's not a whole lot of difference there. Not a whole lot of difference in terms of Blacks and Hispanics. Same thing is applicable to the government. Historically, the government of the United States has historically been underrepresented in the highest echelon for years. And you can see Black members of Congress from the 88th, the 90th, the 96th, all the way to the 116th Congress session. There has been hardly any Black folks in Congress. Wedge gap between black and white Americans, again, historically, whites earned a lot more than black Americans. And that has not changed over the years, not changed significantly anyway. What you want to see is significant changes if there was no systemic racism. So what it means is whoever's in the hiring process is still making the same decisions that they made in 1967, in terms of who they hire. And typically, the research and the data all tells us that people hire the people that look like them. So when you go into an organization and you find all white folks in there, that means that all white folks hired all white people. If you go in there and you see all black people, same story. Black people hired all black people, and Asians hired all Asians, and so on and so forth. Now, what is per capita income of black and white Americans? This is from the Census Bureau, and this is from 2018. And you can see that the per capita income for blacks and whites for whites, it's gone up between 2002 and 2018. For blacks, it went up, but not significant. You can see, but still, there's a huge gap between the two groups in terms of per capita income. Let's look at real median household income versus overall poverty rate by race. When you look at the real median household income, you see that the income of black Americans or African Americans, I prefer the term African Americans. Some people prefer the term black, but I just prefer to call myself an African American. But you can see that there's a significant gap between the real median household income in 2018 between African Americans and white Americans. And you can also see the difference in terms of the overall poverty rate. There is an a huge gap in terms of the overall poverty rate. 8.1% of white Americans in 2018 were represented in terms of population. This source is the Economic Policy Institute. So they did the analysis, and they showed that 8.1% of whites were at the poverty rate, and 20.7% of blacks were at the poverty rate. Household wealth of black and white Americans. And so when we look at this from 1989 to 2019, I think this chart is very telling. You can actually see how the wealth has grown. White wealth has grown significantly, and for black wealth, it has been flat. It's flat between 1989 and 2019. So that's a real significant story that tells us that there is something going on in this country that's keeping those numbers, at least the bottom number, where it is. Okay, median household income among wealth among 25 to 40-year-olds. These are younger people. Looking at white median household incomes of people 25 to 40 years old, the median income is 41,800. For the African American income is 3,550. Now that's the actual, but without student debt, and that's the point I want to make here. I'm quite familiar with this statistic because I worked in higher education for so many years. Without student debt, you can see that both groups, both white and black, have student debt. But without student debt, black median household wealth goes up to $10,010 a year. And white income goes up to $52,700. Now I want to say a little bit about student debt here. The statistics on student loans and student debt show that many African Americans have much more. In fact, the last statistics I saw showed that African Americans ended up, when they graduated from college, with somewhere around $125,000 in student debt. And of course, that links back to all the data we've just explored, during this session. If you don't have income, you can't pay your college tuition. But yet you're the type of person that's really driven and you want to go to college and you want to graduate. So what you do is you borrow money, and you borrow money every year until you get out of college. So the average, that average student debt for Black people is extremely high in this country. Whereas with white families, they do have debt, but it's much lower because they have more income as well. Black women's annual earnings versus other races, you can see that Black women earn 66% as opposed to 100% or 55. They earn, let's put it this way, white men earn $55.6 thousand dollars. Black women earn $36.7 thousand. Now, what this shows is something even more sinister, in the sense that this particular statistic shows us that not only is there a wedge gap in terms of race, there's also a wedge gap in terms of gender between men and women. And of course, we hear that all the time on the television. And so this is not even anything new. It's just a good way to look at it from a statistical point of view, but it's been a problem for years. Systemic racism in terms of upward mobility by city and race. Now, why is that important? That's important because all of us folks born in this country focus on the so-called American dream. And that dream is part of that dream is economic, being economically solid. But the other part of that dream is being able to earn enough money during your lifetime to save some money and to leave your children, if you have any, or whoever you want to leave your money to, in a much better economic position. And as you can see from this chart, that's difficult in many of the cities across the United States in terms of the possibility of being able to leave your children in a much better economic position. When I look at this chart, I'm looking at Washington, D.C., for example, for African Americans. Maybe all of us should move to Washington, D.C., because we would have a much better chance of realizing the American dream and leaving some money back for our children. And also, it's very interesting that New York provides a much better opportunity for African Americans. So I thought this was a very interesting way to talk about systemic racism in the United States. Now, we all know that there's no way for you to really realize the American dream in this country without having some kind of educational background of some sort. And in order to get into good college or university, or any college or university, you more or less have to have earned credits in high school in math and science. Those are the two areas that most institutions of higher education look at when they're trying to figure out whether you are a good fit for that organization. So when you look at the percent of students earning any credit in advanced placement, AP has been I should say it's been a source of problems for American higher education for many, many years. All of my years in higher education, universities were discussing the notion of whether or not AP courses should be counted the way in which they originally were counted. Because what happened is you have to be, in order to get into an AP course, you have to be nominated or whatever by the faculty member. Well, if you're in a school where you're the only Black person, you certainly have a poor chance of being nominated to get into an AP course in math or science. That the statistics tell us that. I don't have this statistic up here, but I can find it. I've seen it for many, many years. So they tell us that the teachers put the folks into math and science AP courses that look like them. And interestingly enough, one of the studies I read talked about the notion that teachers also put nice, cute, or how should you say, nice looking or beautiful people who've been, just considered to be beautiful. They put those people into AP courses and math courses over people that look like me, that are just, plain old Americans. So you can see that in order to get into, college, especially those colleges that pay attention to AP courses, you got issues if you're an African American, because only 6% of the people across the country end up in those AP courses for math, and only 8% for science. Now let's look at one more statistic here. Okay, college attainment of Black and white Americans. One of the good stories here, there's a good story in here if you look at this. And also there's also a problem. But it's always good to have a good story somewhere, in some place. So the good story here, if you look at the statistic for white Americans who went to college and graduated over the years between 1964 and 2018, it's up, 35.2% are white Americans attained a bachelor's degree in this country. And that is a good story. That's good because it increased. And the idea of the notion that it would increase really makes good sense for this country, because you need educated people in this country to make decisions and to keep the country rolling. Also, the story, if you look at it from a good, bad perspective, the story is a good story for African Americans. If you look at the growth, 25.2% of African Americans in 2018 had attained a bachelor's degree. Now, there's still a gap between the white and the Black college graduates, but at least that is, a better story than what it could have been if there had been no change over all of those years. Integrational educational mobility by race. What this means is, I'm going to tell you what it means in my own words here. What it means is when you grow up in a family and your family graduated from high school, and then your family also graduated from somebody in your family, your mother, your daddy, sometimes both of them, mother and father, graduated from college. What this statistic tells us is that the people whose parents graduated from high school and earned a college degree, their children have a much better chance of getting a college degree themselves. In fact, there are a lot of institutions of higher education across this country now that have programs that help. They're not academic programs, but they have programs designed to help Hispanic, Black, and American Indian, and some whites as well, because you also have poor whites in this country that don't have parents that went to college. They have these programs that help people who come into college whose parents have not gone to college and don't have a background in colleges and universities. For example, if your parent went to college and graduated, your parent knows the difference between the dean, the department chair, and the faculty. They know how to calculate GPA. They know the significance of GPA. And they know a lot of other things. They know when it's time to go to the president. In fact, I reported to the president for 19 years. So I know that white parents were more, they were more apt to tell their children when the child called and said, "Mom, I got a problem with this," then the white parent says, "Go straight to the president." And of course, when it gets to the president, what the president does is he delegates some aspect of the university to look into the problem and take care of it. Because the president, of course, wants all the students in the university to have a very good college career. And so they do try to take care of the problem. But if a black student comes in and doesn't know and runs into a problem, they don't know where to go to get that problem solved. In fact, some of these students, the poor whites, the Hispanics and the blacks and the American Indians, they don't even know how to go to the financial aid office and lay out their case so that, for example, many of those students come in and they get a package from the university and it's not enough. It's never enough. And I don't know why parents even think that it's going to be enough, but it's never enough to suffice for the year, for the academic year. So what those students have to end up doing is scrounge around while they're in the freshman year, the sophomore year, the junior year, or the senior year, and find monies from some other source. And they don't even know that you can go to the financial aid office, and that office has links to all kinds of places where you can apply for scholarships. For example, if your parent was a veteran or your mother belonged to this organization or that organization and so on and forth. There's thousands of those kinds of scholarships available out there, not just for people of color, but for anybody. But they don't know that. So what they end up doing is they end up dropping out of school when their bill gets so high that they can't pay it, or they just, they go into a depressive mode and they just leave. Let's look at another set of statistics. Denial rates for home loan application. Now, one of the things that you're going to see is after George, I'm going to show you this coming up. After George Floyd passed away, the Banking Association came out with a statement about changing their policies. The policies had to do with denial rates for home loan applications. If you can't get a home loan, you usually can't get a home, because not very many people in this country can go and just say, here's the $300,000 or whatever you want, or whatever the house costs to pay for the house. So you can see that the denial rate for African Americans is the highest. Then for Hispanic white, and then for non-Hispanics and Asians. So that's one of the reasons you don't have home ownership as much for Black African Americans as you do for other groups. Home ownership by race, 44% of African Americans own a home in this country as of 2020, and 73% of whites own a home. Lack of health insurance. This is a major statistic that plays a major role in the lives of not just, while this statistic focuses on Black and white, there are many people, and white people and other Latinos and other ethnic groups that don't have insurance, health insurance in this country, because we haven't been able to figure that one out yet. So you can see that 9.7% in 2018 of African Americans did not have health insurance, and while only 5.4% of whites were without insurance. In terms of hospitalization, this is a newer statistic, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because you've heard this every day on the news. Of course, the share of hospitalizations and the share of overall population, you can see that we don't need to spend time on this. You know the story because it's been told every day on the news. Sentenced prisoners by race. Again, this is also a story that's been told every day on the news in terms of the share of the population. Black people share of the population is 12.3%, but on the other hand, 32.9% are sentenced prisoners in this country. And again, with Latinos, 18.3% are prisoners, sentenced prisoners, and 23%, their share of the whole population, I gotta get this right, is 18.3%, and their share of prisoners is 23.3%. And on the other hand, whites, the share of overall population is 60.3%, but only 30.4% are prisoners. And I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this slide either because it really tells us, it's akin to the slide, the earlier slide. What we need to see here is that Black males aged 18 to 19 are 12 times more likely to be imprisoned than white males of the exact same age. Marijuana usage versus possession arrest by race. Again, you can see this tells a story. 17.8% of African Americans were using marijuana from age 12 in 2018. Marijuana possession arrest 567.5% compared to 16.5% of whites who were using marijuana and 156.1% who were arrested. Questions there. Marijuana possession by arrest rate, again, that's the same statistics. Let's go on to the next one. Fatal police shootings by million per race. You can see that as of May 2020, 30 Black people were killed, 22 Hispanics were killed, 12 whites were killed, and 4 people who classified in other races. And this data comes from the Washington Post, who keeps up really good statistics. That's why I read that paper every day. Let's go on and get out of this. So this data comes from the Ford Foundation. Blacks are shown 18% fewer homes and 4% rental units than whites. So that means that when you looking for a house, the real estate agent, who's typically a white person, is not going to spend a whole lot of time with you because, first of all, you're probably not buying a house that costs a lot of money, so they're not going to have a high commission. And second, they don't think that you have enough money. I mean, you're not sufficiently funded to be worth their spending a lot more time. So they cut down on the number of homes that they show you. And then one study found that 67% of doctors have a bias against African American patients. Now I'm going to stop there and ask John if he could open the chat room for just a few minutes and we could see if there are any questions or comments.
We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One going back to the unemployment and employment data, and professional managerial
Right.
data. We have a question of how much of that can be attributed to other factors, like personal factors or cultural or associative factors, rather than just merely racism?
Well, how much can be attributed to cultural factors? Number one, if you do do the research, cultural factors separate people into ethnic groups. So if the research tells us, if I come to the job looking for, I come in to be interviewed, the first thing that the folks, and it doesn't matter what their race is, but the first thing they're going to become aware of is the culture that I'm emitting. Because when you walk in the door, you are emitting culture. And that culture then will determine, in many instances, based on the research, whether you get offered the job. Because if you don't look like, and your culture doesn't, and you don't act like the people that are sitting around the table, one of the big words in this country is the word FIT, fit. He doesn't fit or she doesn't fit. So what do they mean by fit? It means you don't look like them, you don't talk like them, you don't act like them, and your culture is totally different. So what is that? I mean, you can call it whatever you want to, but it's not good. What's the other part of the question?
We have another question going back to the education portion. They want to know how they can affect change in our educational system in big cities such as Indianapolis.
That's a really good question. One of the problems with big systems like Indianapolis is not the only one that has this problem, is that, again, the research for, 25, 30 years has told us that in order to educate children, you need to have somebody in that school that looked like them, looked like the children that's in that school. So let's take Zionsville. Zionsville, you have, I don't remember what the percentage of children who are African American, for example, or Asian or Latino. I don't know those percentages, but Zionsville Public Schools need to do something in order to make sure that the percentage of students in their school who end up in those ethnic categories need to be represented by the teachers in those schools, because all of the research for the last, 30 years have told us exactly that. Children are more apt to relate to teachers who look like them. The other thing is reaching out to parents and making certain that they feel comfortable in the school environment. A lot of parents will tell, and they have told researchers, that they don't go to the school PTA or the school meetings and whatever because they feel uncomfortable. First of all, you might have to, you may have to dress a certain way, or when you get in there, you're being talked down to and that kind of stuff. So some schools like Indianapolis, and I don't know whether Indianapolis is doing it, but I know several other schools are doing this. They are working with teachers to make sure that the school environment is welcoming, not just to the children, but to the teachers. And the other thing is to monitor the school data. Parents should be monitoring the school data. Schools will put up data. They put up what is called aggregated data. So they'll say 97% of our children graduated from whatever school, let's say Timbuktu, and went on to college. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, not at all. If I'm an African-American parent, that's really no good for me. What I want to know is I want you to put up aggregated data. Of that 97%, how many were women? How many were African Americans? How many were Latinos? How many were whites? How many were males? And so on and so forth. That's the data that parents, as well as people who care about the educational system in this country, should be monitoring, and when it doesn't happen, when there is a gap, then people in the community need to be able to interact with the school system with that data in hand and say to the school system, what are you going to do to close these gaps? The other thing that schools need to do, and some schools are doing it because I'm working with a couple of schools that are doing it, and I did it when I was at the university as well. You don't just train the teachers on implicit bias, because the teachers already, you do train them, of course, but teachers are there because most of the time they really want to be there and they really want to do well by their students. But if you don't train the students on implicit bias, what you have going for you is you got the teachers in the classroom trying to do a good job with the students, but as soon as they get on the bus, as soon as they get in the playground, that bias is all over the place, and those children of color are just getting it, period. Okay, can we move on, or do we have one other important?
Looks like we can move on.
Okay, great. All right, so now let's move on to a different section. I told you earlier that there were many organizations across this country that are in the process of they've already put out public statements to become an anti-racist organization, and they have not denied the fact that they were racist organizations, that they did have problems, systemic racist problems. And I've just pulled a few of them together so you can see that some people across in this country, including some folks in the government, we don't have a systemic racism problem, but I don't think that those people even know the definition of systemic race. Otherwise, they couldn't make that kind of statement. However, we do have, fortunately, some excellent organizations in this country that do understand the definition and have committed to develop new policies or expand their existing policies in order to correct the racist issues and the problems that they had in the past. So the first one is the American College of Physicians, the New England Journal of Medicine, Forbes Real Estate Council. They put out an excellent article called How Systemic Racism Exists in U.S. Housing Policies. United States Auto Industry, and again, when I read that article, I was like, my goodness, you tell me the auto industry's been doing all of this kind of stuff, like charging black people more than they charge white people when they come in the door for a car. I didn't realize that, and I've probably been charged more for the little piece of car that I have. But anyway, the United States auto industry put out a statement and a new set of policies. United States insurance regulators, which also was new to me, because I didn't even know there was such a thing as an insurance regulator. But what they're saying is the insurance you buy has been race-based, which is interesting. The Nevada governor calls for new policies to address systemic racism and double standard in policing that favor whites. William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which gives out millions of dollars each year, I just read their new policy. You can't get a new grant from this foundation anymore unless you can prove that you're going to address racism in some way, and also that you're going to include a diverse group of people that you're studying for whatever it is you're doing, what you're doing, a program or whatever. It has to be a diverse group of people. The J.P. Morgan Chase Company, I thought that banks were doing sort of some little stuff behind closed doors, but you never know until you actually see that they put out a statement, a new policy addressing the racism in banking, and what they were going to do about it. Go on to the next one. Capital One, Adidas, Amazon, IBM, Anderson Horowitz, Apple, Estee Lauder, Facebook, Fitbit, NASCAR, PayPal, PepsiCo, Pinterest, Sephora and Rent the Runway, SoftBank, Target, Twerk, Viacom, CBS, Walmart, Warner Media, and YouTube. And there's many others. I just couldn't get them all on here. One of them was the people who run Vogue magazine. And if you notice, if any of you saw the Vogue magazine on the shelves last month, there was October issue, you notice that the Vogue magazine had a big article, or not just a big article, but the whole magazine, all throughout the magazine, had images of people of color, which was not the way Vogue magazine was since it came into existence. So even companies like that have rewritten their policies, which is very interesting. So anyone who can say there's no systemic racism in the United States, I don't know what kind of education they had or got. All right, so there are some myths that keep racism according to Peggy McIntosh. Remember I told you that I was going to make sure that I presented literature to you from the experts, the white experts in this country who study racism. Peggy McIntosh is one of the most well-respected white professors in this country who's been for, 40 years studying racism. And so she came up with 4 myths. The myth of meritocracy. And what she's saying is the individual is the only unit of society, and that whatever a person ends up with must be what he or she individually wanted, worked for, earned, and deserved. Now, then she countered that with, this myth rests on the assumption that what people experience, how they see, feel, think, and behave, and what they're capable of accomplishing are not influenced by any social system or circumstances. And I think all of us could relate to that for sure. I think I told you growing up in a city where there were 2 major universities, and one of those universities, Florida A&M, was a historically Black institution. When I was a child, I saw and lived in a community where Black people had PhDs. So growing up as a child, I thought a PhD was more or less equivalent to a bachelor's degree. So I didn't really see the distinct difference. And I knew that, okay, when I was growing up, when I was 14 years old, I knew I was going to do a PhD because the people in my neighborhood had one. And I figured I couldn't do without one. But anyway, what she's saying here is that the experiences you have play a major role in who you become and what you are capable of doing later on in life. She says this myth does not acknowledge systems of oppression or privilege that for various people and in various situations could make life arbitrarily more or less difficult. She also says that there's a myth of manifest destiny. And again, this is Peggy McIntosh, not Abbie Robinson-Armstrong speaking here. White people were intended by God to take the lands of indigenous people and others in order to possess the whole of what is now the continental United States. And then she counters that with, under this myth, whites do not have to allow into their moral or ethical awareness the fact that we live on land taken from those who were here before us and whose cultures, physical existence, white people attempted to destroy. Believing explicitly or implicitly, and I'm glad she put that in there because we talked about implicit bias, that God intended white people to settle North America has excused many whites from seeing white settlement as a matter of racial oppression in which they are the evildoers. End of quote. Then she talks about the myth of racelessness. White people, and this goes back to the fact that we talked last week 2 weeks ago, about color blindness. Color blindness is akin to racelessness. White people do not have race or racial experiences. And It's funny when I'm teaching a class and we're talking about race, and the average white person will put up their hand and say, well, we don't have culture. Well, yes, you do. The moment you walk in the door, my eyes could be closed, but I know you're white because of what you're doing and what you're saying. In this view, we are just normal. Others have race. And people attribute race to the color in the skin, not always to the culture, but which others have race, which we are led to believe makes problems for them or us. We who are so-called normal are radically unmarked, and we set the standard for what is to be human. Now, she counters that with the participation of white people in systems of dominance of oppression is not seen as racial. And going on, she goes on to the myth of monocultural. And this particular myth, it really causes problems for Americans outside of the United States. I lived outside of the country for 18 years, and I'm telling you, I got my tail beat every other day because people assumed that all Americans were exactly the same. I didn't get my tail beat because I was Black. I got my tail beat because I was American. Not because because they didn't even, most countries, they don't even address you as Black American. They address you as an American, and they can identify you the moment you walk in the door. They know you're an American. So what Peggy McIntosh is saying, there is one American culture and that we all experience it more or less the same way. Anyone who's having trouble with American culture is not seeing accurately or behaving appropriately. But that's not true. Believe me, it isn't. So here's what she counters that with. The myth of monocultural imposes an assumption and a requirement of people of color, on people of color. It requires them to see and feel and behave like white people, to assimilate into white culture. And it assumes that they have nothing to lose by forsaking their own culture of origin and a great deal to gain from fitting into one normal culture. Let me give you an example. For years, in the corporate America, women, for example, had to dress and act like men in order to make it. African Americans had to do basically the same thing, but in addition to that, African Americans who have curly hair, and all of us don't have curly hair, I have curly hair, but not all of us do. But those who had curly hair had ended up straightening their hair because everybody else in the organization had straight hair. So in the 1990s, African American women started to say, well, look, that's not my hair. I'm gonna wear my hair regardless of whether it's curly, straight, or whatever. I'm gonna wear it in a natural way. So what happened is there was a lot of organizations that fired Black people for wearing their hair natural. Not only that, but there were school systems specifically in the South where children came in with their hair in a natural state, and the school system said no, they had to come in, they had to go back, they put them out of the school, and they had to, on this particular case in Mississippi, at a Catholic school, they put this child out because the child hair was in natural state. Now that happened not just in that school, but I just remember that one because it was such a poignant situation. But today, African Americans are saying, no. Listen, if I got straight hair, I got straight hair. If I got curly hair, I got curly hair. And leave it to California, which is a lead state in terms of inclusion and diversity. California was the first state that passed a law 3 years ago that said an organization, a company cannot fire or get rid of a person because of the hair. Can't do it. Now, from what I understand, there are, I think it's 10 more states now that have put that law into place. Okay, she the last myth that she talks about is the myth of internalized superiority. And she says, when white people receive these key benefits and assumptions from their families, the educational system, and the media, they absorb the idea, and that's spelled wrong, I apologize, they absorb the idea that white people are superior to others. This is not said in so many words. Instead, the assumption is that it is natural for us to be in charge of the world and its affairs, and that only a few of a very unusual person of color, unlike others in his or her kind, can be trusted with power. Gets instilled in the subconsciousness mind of whites, and this plays out with a lot of blacks, especially with people like me. When people look at my CV and they, it looks, well, my CV looks basically like any other person on the same trajectory. The first question is, well, how did you, how did you earn a PhD? As if it couldn't be a normal, natural process for me and other African Americans. In fact, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, one of the trust companies put out a statistic that showed that the percentage of people and women in the country who got PhDs, the highest percentage were black people. We can move on. Let's go to the next one because it's getting late here. So I'm going to end with 4 tasks, and these come from Robin DiAngelo, and you got some of the material. I sent you several articles that Robin DiAngelo has written. She also is very well known for her book called White Fragility. I sent you some portion of that book. Everybody's been reading the book. You can't buy the book anymore. It's been completely sold out for months on end. But anyway, this comes from Robin DiAngelo. And Robin DiAngelo says there are 4 tasks for individuals who are struggling with issues of racism. One is to do what we've been talking about all these sessions. Remove from your vocabulary the following claim: I am not biased. Get that out of your head. Another task is to spend the rest of your life grappling with the question of what it means to be white. How has your race shaped every aspect of your life from the moment that you took your first breath? If you ask some white people, what does it mean to be white? They can't answer you because they haven't thought about it. So what she's asking you to do is to think about it. And another one, ask your question, ask yourself, and this is a critical one. This is one that all of us need to be asking. How have I managed to be a fully functioning professional adult and not know what to do about racism? It's been talked about, but how come you don't know what to do about it all these years? That's from Robin and DiAngelo. And finally, what she says is, you can never understand what you need to understand about racism if you only listen to white people or engage with their work. She suggests that you read everything you can by people of color, listen to people of color, watch their videos, turn your attention to hearing what people of color have been telling us for a century. End of quote. And I want to thank you very much for the support I have from you this afternoon. And I look forward to working with you for our final session next week. Now, are there any other questions that we might be able to anticipate?
There are no other open questions at this time.
Good.
So I would like to thank you for another interesting session with the community conversations, and thank everyone that watched this conversation from home.